Yeah.
Boom. Oh, you're on. It just happened.
It's all happening.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the VOXOLOGY podcast. If you don't recognize the third voice, it is the voice of my son, Nate. Big Nate, home from college.
Yep.
We were, we were dropping in ratings, so we needed Big Nate to come in and increase our listenership, particularly in the 18 to 26-year-old demographic. That's right. So, well done.
I have one thing to say. You're welcome.
There it is.
That's what you said last time.
Yep.
Big Nate, home from college.
Yes.
And surprised us. He said he was going to come home on a Friday, but he surprised us by coming home on a Thursday night.
Yep.
There may have been some yelling, some running, some hugging.
I'm like that.
It was really fun. Seth Erie kind of went berserk this morning. The amount of time Nate was just jumped on, just randomly, in the half hour between we woke him up and his bus came was pretty remarkable. I would say the ratio was about, for every 3 minutes, there was one tackling.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd say about 2 minutes. He also said that he wanted me to be a part of his morning routine. Not routine. And I thought that was the funniest thing.
Yeah,
we're building a whole Seth dictionary, and we'll have to add that to it, too.
He said hibachi this morning.
Yeah, he struggles with hibachi. It takes him a while to get the H going, but then he gets the rest of it out pretty well. He's just that's what he wants for his birthday dinner is hibachi. But anyway, we need to do a shout out because we have found one of our dear listeners.
Yes.
So Nate, take it away, buddy. Where do you go to college?
So I go to school at Wright State, Raider Up.
Raider Up, Wright State Raiders.
For all of the Wright State people out there.
There's one.
There's two that listen. One of them's me. And I don't even listen that much.
I was going to say.
I only listen to the ones I'm on.
Exactly.
First of all.
Exactly.
And that's like 2 minutes, but it's 2 minutes of greatness.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's another guy.
People want to see your face.
Oh. His name's Jimmy. Shout out Jimmy.
What up, Jimmy?
Jimmy Hoffman.
What up, Jimmy Hoffman?
He's bald.
So he's good looking.
A better looking version of my father.
It's fair.
Great man. I've talked to him a few times.
He is the husband of who?
The Wright State women's basketball head coach's husband.
Okay.
Who stopped me in the parking lot and, said, I've listened to your dad's podcast for several years.
Oh man.
You're definitely, the best part of it. This is all from him.
That's fair.
Totally, I can hear him saying that. I can just hear it.
It's a small world. Just wanted to give him a shout out because he's great.
Yeah.
And And I wish
Nate does have the best theme song on the podcast.
I do.
You do have a great theme song.
I mean, I actually do want to say something to the public.
Do it. Say it. Your public's waiting. Been waiting for this.
About 100 episodes ago, I brought up the subject of the public sending emails to Seth over emails to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I kind of want to revisit that topic just because
you're lonely. You're not getting emails.
Man. My emails are lonely. I'm lonely.
Okay.
And I just wish for what I bring to this podcast that I got a little more return on my investment. So.
Yeah. Let's just be clear. Seth, like when people write into the podcast, rarely is it ever Mike and Tim. It is now normally Seth, Mike, and Tim, or Seth, Tim, Mike.
Yeah, and Mike and Tim will often be in the parentheses, like Seth and Mike and Tim.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I just honestly, I love my brother. He's cool.
He is.
And whatever, but like, he wouldn't be here without my guidance as an older brother.
That's right.
Like the thing where it's like.
Yeah.
Your favorite athlete's favorite athlete or something like that.
Yes.
I am your favorite podcaster, Seth's favorite person. So you guys just
nice.
Looking up to me.
Yeah.
Sending me emails.
Yes. Somebody did. Nancy, I think our friend Nancy sent you.
Like she did after the last.
Sent you an email and you responded, which is
I did, of
phenomenal.
course, because that's what happens.
He's the real deal.
Interact. I totally don't sound desperate at all for attention.
No.
No.
I just want to.
You're very shy.
Shout out my people. you know.
There has been a cacophony of outcry for more Nate Erie on the podcast.
What? Right. I mean, that's not even a word.
That's a word. Check it with their English professor over there.
That's right. It's coming up on Thanksgiving time.
Yep, exactly. We're on Thanksgiving. We'll have a cornucopia.
There you go. I just got one thing to say.
Oh,
whoa!
Syndrome down, money up.
Oh, did we ever explore that on the podcast?
I don't know if we did or not.
Hey, everybody go to SoundCloud. Seth and I have a mixtape called Syndrome
amazing.
Down, Money Up.
Syndrome Down, Money Up.
I've established that as Seth's life's motto. Because no matter what syndrome he has, his money's going up.
That's right. And you got to do disability to get disbread.
Yeah.
That was my favorite. That was my favorite one.
It's all about wordplay.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I just want to get Seth's message out there.
Disability to get disbread.
Our album only has about like 10 plays, and I think half of them.
No, I got to be a couple of those.
So we need to run these numbers up.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
You guys.
Yeah.
Just turn your headphones down a little bit because the audio quality is awful.
Yeah. This was recorded on a boombox, I think.
It's great. It's great.
Yeah.
It is great. Did the music video did it make it out into the world?
No, I don't know.
There is a Syndrome Down, Money Up. We should, you know what? We need to put that on our YouTube channel.
We should premiere it.
Yeah, on the VOXOLOGY channel. Let's do it.
Great idea.
Where is? Can we Dropbox it to Stafford?
Yeah, I have it.
Oh, bro.
Is Syndrome Down, Money Up like will somebody cancel me for that sentence?
I'm sure somebody will.
Yeah, it's all right. All the cancel people
it's in good intention.
Left the podcast a while back.
Oh.
That's why we are confident. Gambus jokes he has 17 listeners. I think we're at 30. So, and one of those.
Gambus.
Yeah, Gambus.
Well, Gambus. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna be a listener for the first 7 minutes and 30 seconds of this podcast.
There you go.
Yeah.
You wonder why? Because I'm here.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm here.
Yes.
All right.
Wow.
Shout out Jimmy.
Yep, Jimmy.
Shout out my people. Shout out
Go
Jesus.
Raiders. Yes.
Go Raiders.
Yep.
Shout out
Seth Erie.
Shout out Seth. Shout out Down syndrome.
Yep.
Shout out money.
Disability to get disbread.
Sorry, I stood up.
That was amazing.
That's all I got.
You got impassioned.
If you're watching this on YouTube, you're getting every single bit of Nate's face really up close.
I'm passionate.
Yeah.
I'm passionate.
Yeah.
So,
disability to get disbread.
Also, I'll put my Venmo.
We draw the line right there. Oh my goodness.
All right. Hey, have a good podcast.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
That's all I got.
All right. There it is. Nate, 2 minutes of that was awesome. So great job. So hello, dear listener. Yeah, we got a 30. I'll take 30. That's pretty solid.
30 listeners.
Yeah. Although, okay, so I got to adjust my light. I got lighting here on the YouTubes. And my face reflects light like nobody's business. So I got to go warm. Anyway, hey, we're glad that you're tuning in. And maybe you're not, but we are. So welcome. We're thrilled that you're here. Today, we want to introduce a segment called This Week on the Internet I Learned. So, all right. So I got some things this week on the internet I learned.
There you go.
Or from the internet this week I learned. Or I learned from the internet this week.
Wow, that was a grammar lesson.
Any of those would work. So first of all, I learned on the internet from William Wolf, who is on a Twitter. He is a Christian nationalist who said, "White Christians are the most targeted and persecuted class in America."
I learned the Wolf that wrote the book on.
Yeah.
Two Wolves.
Well, no, there's a Stephen and then there's a William.
Yeah, one of them wrote a book that was literally, what was it called? Like The Case for Christian or something like that.
Nationalism, totally. I don't remember. They're both pretty terrible, it seems. Their thinking is, I'm sure his people are great. Now, but that was news to me. As a white Christian man, I'm leaning in to the persecution I've endured. As first of all, in my whiteness, second of all, in my Christianity, and thirdly, in my maleness.
Yeah. Fourthly, in your straightness. It's all in there.
Yep, it's all in there. So that was one thing I learned this week on the internet. Another thing I learned this week on the internet from Mark Driscoll. I hadn't heard a good yelling Mark Driscoll video in a while.
Oh man, my algorithm really loves to pump them through.
Yeah, well, that says something about you,
sure does.
My dear friend. But this week he was yelling that, and I learned this on the internet this week.
Be a segment too. This week with Driscoll
yelling. Yeah. Well, this week he was yelling that Jesus came the first time as a meek lamb, and the second time he's coming as a lion. The first time he came, and I'm quoting him, to sacrifice himself to his enemies. Now, the second time he's coming to kill his enemies and drench himself in their blood. First time he was subject to the wrath of God. This time he's bringing the wrath of God. And of course, there's one verse that sweet Driscoll builds an entire rant out of in Revelation that we've already discussed. And again, what people will do to this book in pulling it and yanking it out of context is just absolutely ridiculous. So I learned, first of all, that being yelled at on the internet feels good. And then secondly, that Revelation is really about the bloodthirsty Jesus. So I'm kind of excited about that. The third thing I learned this week, Tim, on the internet, is that the reason people are leaving the church, and I quote, let me see, no, I got to find it. Let's see here. But most of today's de-churching is the result of our wayward hearts, not church leader scandals.
Yep.
And this is a guy who has worked for several organizations that have had church leader scandals.
Yep.
Telling us it's actually on us, the disillusionment with the church. Now, to be gracious, there was a book that came out called The Great De-Churching. And The Great De-Churching makes the case that there are loads of reasons people leave churches. We're such a transient culture. You move away like crazy. COVID made it normalized just kind of sitting at home on a Sunday morning or streaming a church service. The busyness of life and youth sports. And so on a charitable reading, this guy is saying, hey, church leadership scandals kind of validate the decisions we've already made to not believe in the church. Mm-hmm. That's on a charitable reading. On an uncharitable reading, as somebody who has been a part of several organizations that have been accused of spiritual abuse and so on, I think he's got a load of baloney. And it's fascinating because what did we say? Frost my nuggets. This frosted my nuggets because
we got so many emails on that one.
Sometimes genius just arrives. It's not planned on.
If we could take if we could make bets, if we could place bets on what things we'll get emails on, what we won't, I would lose every bet.
Every bet. And it's no question. So the article begins. So this is what I learned on the internet this week.
And I'll put this article in the show notes from the Gospel Coalition.
And go ahead and read it. It's there's some things in here I would go, well, sure. So we start with a John Piper video quote.
Yeah. Did you see that last week?
I did. Yes. Where if somebody says I'm not walking away from Jesus, but I'm done with the church, Piper shockingly responds, to walk away from the church is to walk away from Christ. Yeah. Shockingly, then we'd get a Gospel Coalition article sort of defending that point of view.
Yeah.
And granted, the author acknowledges this is a season of rot and corruption in the church, and man, we couldn't agree more. And then he makes the case, shockingly, from early church fathers that they saw the church as like inseparable from Jesus following. And then makes the case from the New Testament, the church is the body of Christ, and here we go. The issue that I didn't see him address, which is so silly, is the distinction between church as organization and church as organism.
Yes.
Like that isn't even addressed. It's just people are fed up with the institutional organization. Yeah. And to say that if you're fed up with that means you're fed up with Jesus is a load of frosted nuggets. Let's just put it gently. Right? It's just not true. It is true that to be a Christian is to be part of a corporate social reality called the body of Christ or the kingdom of God or the church. But to say and to say that you're done with the body of Jesus, I can see where somebody would say, yeah, to be done with the body of Jesus is to be done with Jesus. Okay, fair enough. I would word that really differently with loads of qualifiers, but I understand that point. But there's no distinction made between the institutional rot and the church as organism, body, right? Family, household. And so I just get so frustrated at these blanket, pithy statements that don't give any nuance. And I'm sure there are people leaving churches who want to leave churches and are looking for a reason. Sure. Great. Okay. But pointing that out.
But I would address that totally different too, or approach that so different.
Absolutely. Like, yeah, you're right. It's your moral wayward heart that's leading you away from the church. So come back.
Right.
Yeah. Really? That's the message. Sure it is. So yeah, loads of issues. So and then I learned from you, who's learned from the internet, that there was a word that was used a lot this week. What was that word,
Timothy? It was from the two people that you already listed.
What was that word?
The Wolf and the Driscoll. Apostasy. Apostate.
Apostasy.
It's going on. It was like the buzz. You remember how Pee Wee always had like the word of the day, and they would try to he would try to trick people into saying it, and then all the characters would scream on the show.
I have never once watched Pee Wee's Playhouse.
That was
Pee Wee
like
the
my
movie.
Sesame Street. I was the weird kid. But
yeah, that explains something.
Yeah, it does.
Yes.
Wolf was. What was he getting mad about?
Hungry like the wolf.
I can't remember what his tweet was.
It was about we're the wayward son or something. Like
the prodigal son, and which I'm sure you have lots of things you could say about the point of that story of the prodigal son, how often it gets kind of used opposite. But just this idea, like they're just out there swinging, calling everybody who has a mildly different take on anything an apostate. Well,
heretic's too weak now.
That's exactly how it felt. I felt like they learned a new word that was a little sharper, but also sounds a little intellectual, and wanted to throw it around there. But I don't know. But
it's tough. It's tough when you build a whole brand of Christianity on calling other people names.
Well, it's got to be rough for. I mean, I would love to be a fly on the wall when someone like Driscoll is putting together his Sunday message. It's always so angry. Yeah. And I don't know. I wonder if if there's a process of riling himself up, like if he has a routine that kind of gets him into
a routine.
A routine. That's right. But the article, right off the bat, that one, I feel like I just had this conversation with someone at school.
Which article are we talking about right now?
The Gospel Coalition one.
Okay, the church one. Okay, so apostate was the word of the week.
Apostate was the word of the week, and that was on Twitter, because Driscoll was calling out, he called out Red Letter Christians, like Shane Claiborne's organization that is built around, let's stick to the red words of Jesus in the Bible and kind of build from there.
Yeah.
He was calling them apostates and he was wording it all through this idea of treason, and that these are treasonous acts. Which I thought was interesting, as we're in a really big Christian nationalist conversation.
Totally. So good. So good.
He called out, Shane and New Evangelicals and a couple other people, just saying that they're, whatever. But
So that was our word for the week.
Yeah, the church thing on the Gospel Coalition article. First of all, like I think you kind of hinted at, the tone of it is very like, I hate it when, which is funny because I'm teaching right now students how to write argumentative, persuasive essays, and like the number one rule is that you're confident and that you argue clearly, like, you know, to persuade your audience. That tone and the stance in this article is so like authoritative and lacking any grace or nuance. And then it's like, it's also, and then I read his bio, and because it felt the whole time like he was platforming. And then it's like he's one of the leading millennial voices on conversations of
Right.
And then second, it's like telling an abused wife that her priority or her status is first as a wife to be married and not to care about her own well-being at all. Yeah. Which is like, you just like stay in the abusive relationship because that's what you're called to do. There's no responsibility on the church or its leadership. And then he talks about like God will not be mocked, and that's how he talks about how the corruption of the church will be dealt with.
Yeah.
And so he's again just pivoting, or
it's not your job, it's God's job.
Yeah, and God will take care of it. So you just sit down and be quiet. And then he takes out it really bothers me because there's so many people who are trying to figure out. It does feel like the church as we know it, and I mean that in the institutional sense and the business sense, is obviously going through some intense growing pains and will likely be very different in the next generations.
Oh,
and a lot of people
amen.
Are seeing that, and they're freaked out, and they're trying to shame and guilt people back into the doors.
Oh,
and it's just so gross. So when I was reading, it's the same conversation I have with my kids. So you talked about the white guilt thing. That came up in my classroom about white men being the most persecuted people right now. And I was just like, well, how so? Like, have you been segregated? Have you been, have you lost rights? Have you just asking longer questions, like pull that thread a little bit more to see where, what you think the root of that is. And so with this article is like, he talks about sin a lot, church, worship. And it's like, anytime I have these conversations now, it's like, well, define each of those things for me.
Yeah.
Like, define sin in the context of how you're using it in this article. Define church, which you kind of did, right? Like, it's not just this business entity that has lights and stages and microphones and budgets and that kind of stuff, right? Because that's what he's talking about.
Well, he didn't clarify.
He didn't, but everything he's talking about is people leaving that institution, not
it seems like it, yes,
church or leaving a community of people. It's leaving this entity.
Right.
How would you define that then? What did Jesus actually advocate for?
Yeah, when Jesus said you will know them by their fruit, that assumes you will examine the fruit of a community, and that's not every community is going to be awesome.
No.
So it's like, hey, stop discerning. And I understand that there is a counter thought that says, hey, we're throwing the word trauma around too much. Church hurt is being used as an excuse. And I have no doubt that maybe that's true for some people. But making that overall point really negates the experience and pain of loads of other people.
Yeah, and you'd have to earn the right to say that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You cannot just like... It's so counter to true community and true love and true empathy to just decry people's pain and lump them together and be like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and stop being.
Yeah, God will take care of it. Yeah. Okay, so can I do a little digression that will come back to this point? I don't want to interrupt because you had some good stuff on this.
No, go do it.
All right. So I spent 2 days in Austin, Texas at the Nerd Ministry Summit. Yeah. All right. Now,
is that the Nerd Ministry Summit?
Nerd Ministry Summit? Yeah, something like that.
Which I love.
Yeah. Nerd Culture Ministry Summit, maybe. Nerd culture is, and it's playful. It's gaming. It's Dungeons and Dragons. It's cosplay. It's, conventions. Yeah. Science fiction, fantasy. Nate, what are you doing in the background? That's so funny. There's just this red bob of hair floating around. And there are like, I don't know. They said something like there are 3 billion gamers in the world in one form or another. And yeah, wow. I mean, I don't know, but even if it weren't that, there's a lot.
Yeah.
And so there's this whole community of people strategizing. How do you bring light into those places? Because sometimes they're really toxic and really dark. Mm-hmm. But on other occasions, there are people there in those spaces that find no other acceptance anywhere.
Yeah. Such an interesting missions field.
It is. And so I'm with all of these really interesting, like there are people who planted online churches. There are people who stream their family game nights on Twitch. There are digital missionaries who create like friendly and safe and comfortable atmospheres online for people to game and talk about gaming and talk about other life issues. I talked to a guy whose job it is to identify nerd-friendly churches. Because part of their ministry is to see if somebody comes to faith, that they have a place to go where they're not going to get shut down for playing video games, or wearing a Dungeons and Dragons, t-shirt or whatever. And these are all young people, right? I mean, they're almost exclusively. Now there's some older. I mean, I play, I game, but it's totally a hobby and whatever else. But there was one guy who was speaking about space, and he works for Plain Joe Studios, which is a studio that's done amazing work. Like they did work for Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland, and this guy was making a point about space and how you use even digital space. He said everything speaks, right? Every single part of someone's experience of something speaks some sort of value or not. Mm-hmm. And that space should answer these questions. Okay. Now he means architecture, digital space, signs, like everything environmental. Space should answer these questions. Am I safe here? Am I confident here? Do I belong here? Am I worth loving? Am I worth your attention? Am I wanted here? Now, you take those questions and apply them to how people would experience church.
Yeah, we read those again.
Yes, and I would argue we're asking the same questions in a church. Mm-hmm. And if the answer is, am I safe here? If the answer is no, then simply blaming the sin of my heart as the reason why I'm not going fails miserably to capture the dynamic that's actually going on.
It makes me really angry.
And you wouldn't like Tim when he's angry.
It's true.
And what's your secret, Tim? I'm always angry.
That's right.
It's all that's Avengers.
I was going to say yoga, but.
So here were the questions. And so this was a breakout of this conference. And I was so proud of these guys. I mean, this is the first time they've done this. And like their church planners there. I mean, it was just really interesting. Like people who were way out of the box thinking, how do I take something that I love and am passionate about and build bridges and create...
traditionally very isolated, right? Like you're in a chair by yourself with headphones
on.
So to try to offer something that can help build community within that.
Yeah. I've had some incredible conversations online with people.
Yeah.
A trucker who drives for 16 hours and then he stops, and all he does, because he's in the middle of nowhere, is hooks up to the internet and plays Destiny. Or people in the LGBTQ community who find acceptance nowhere else. Mm-hmm. Or, so anyway, all that is to say, this set of questions I want to apply not just to space, but I want to apply to hospitality. I want to my personal life. So I'm floating around an airport yesterday and I'm just watching what it must be like to be a single woman. Mm-hmm. Or a woman with kids and no help. Yeah. And I'm like, I wonder how, like, what's their safety level when they're in just around gobs of strangers? For me, I've never felt unsafe.
Right.
But this set of questions, am I safe here? Am I confident here? Do I belong here? Am I worth loving? Am I worth your attention? When big churches are just rushing people out of their seats so they can get another service in,
right.
Like that's what that communicates. You're not. Mm-hmm. Am I wanted here? And it's like, dude, So your take on the article made me think of that set of questions to say, the minute there's a big no, so if I'm a young lady and I'm not welcome in the theological spaces, it's not my sinful heart, even though they would say, well, yeah, it's sin for a woman to do this. It's not my sinful heart that's causing me to go. I mean, the number of personal friends who are huge names who have fallen significantly in my life. We're over a dozen. And it's just like, at some point, to blame people for losing heart.
Yeah.
Oh.
And to blame it's the article frames it as though it's a personal agent, or like you're
making this decision.
Yeah. And it's just like,
you're the leaving.
It's a completely one-sided blame the victim. And I hate to use that term, but I think a lot of this conversation is around abuse or being made to feel small in a community that's supposed to make you feel the list that you just said. Like, so it is very opposite. When I was getting my master's, I studied a theorist. It's been a while now. I think her name was Diane Massey, and she was she had a theory. It was called space and place. You know, it's about how every single place has a space around it, meaning that if you were to put like a pin into a place on a map, and then you put all these strings out to all the different human experiences that have happened at that place, that a place holds all the space of all of those experiences around it. And so I wrote an essay on for that, exploring her theories through Mount Rushmore, and kind of the history of Mount Rushmore, and how like it was a holy place for the Lakota tribe, the Black Hills, is where the gods came down and met man on this this holy place, and then we arguably carved our own gods onto the face of that. And so it's like this, it's a space, it's a place that holds the space of a lot of like clashing, you know, for us, it's like this national pride. For them, it's this blemish on a holy land. And so I think about that too, with like church buildings and stuff. Like there's a lineage and a history of all these different encounters and experiences within there, and they all matter. They're all real. But they're not, but we try to always define it as one very specific thing. And whoever's got the loudest voice or the microphone is the person that gets to define that. Yeah. And that's a lot of human history, American history, right? You always hear the phrase like history is told by the winners. And I don't know if you ever read like the People's History of the United States, the Howard Zinn book that he tells American history through the lens of everybody who was persecuted or segregated or whatever from day one all the way up and through, I think, the 90s.
Oh, wow.
But it's a really fascinating take on looking through the lens of the marginalized throughout American history. And it's not a great story, but I don't know. I think it's all really interesting. I think the church leaders could really do to take a breather and really think about why they do what they do, and what is it? What's the purpose? Why? And I'm not saying that I'm not saying that to say that there's not a point at church. I think there is, absolutely. I think we are supposed to have community and be together, but how and why we do that are very different. How and why is different than the what.
That's it. Absolutely. And if I weren't a part of this kind of gentle community I'm a part of, you know, I would probably step out of evangelicalism and go to, like, we used to go to when I wasn't officially church working, we went to a Lutheran church. And I'd never been to one, and I'd never done portions of the liturgy. But what was so great is there wasn't any emphasis on growing the church. It was, we do the liturgy. This is what we do. We are the people of God. Here's how we are the people of God. And this is what we do every week. And it wasn't like, hey, there are going to be a lot of guests this week, so let's make sure it's good. The music wasn't off the chain. The sermon series was, you know what I mean? It was like, it was just faithful. It wasn't glorious or spectacular.
Yeah.
And I loved it so much. It was
That's how
just
here
so
it's
different.
the Episcopal Church is where a lot of folks that we're friends with who have left the non-denominational kind of, whatever thing that we all grew up in, and they're landing in things like that, like Lutheran or Episcopal, these things that have, things that pay in, like that tie you into a.
That's right.
What's the word? Like a lineage
Tradition?
of your faith. Yeah.
Lineage?
So,
yeah. Yep.
And I see that. I think these conversations are fun because like it's you and I talking. I am not a part of a church. You are a teaching pastor at a church. So we're like straddling both sides of this fence.
Totally.
Advocating for a very similar thing.
Yeah, your heart is wayward.
Mine is black
is not.
And yours is pink. And it's like we have to just sit in the tension between those two colors.
Yes. I see your dead heart, and I want to paint it black.
There it is.
That's what I want to do. Duran Duran released a Halloween album.
I know.
And it's actually really okay. So anyway, things that we learned on the internet this week. How was therapy, bro? I haven't caught up with you. Yeah. So Tim and his wife. Well, you tell the story. I don't know why I would set this up.
Well, it was just me this week. We've had sick kids in the house, so it was amazing. If we can continually advocate for people to find something. Someone emailed in about how do I find a good Christian therapist. And I don't know, other than I know the Holy Post they're sponsored by something that Phil always runs a commercial for that's like good faith counseling or something. But at least from what he says in the ad, I'll try to find it and put it in the show notes. But I think that from what he says in the ad, they're good with like if you don't match with the person, that there's other options, which I think is key to, especially if you're nervous about therapy.
Yeah.
But my therapist is a rock star, and we talked about just like I've been doing a lot of self-analysis and have found a profound sense of anger in me that's very big and loud. And so we kind of talked through that stuff for a while. And she asked me if I have a problem with a disconnect between my head and my heart, which is something we've been working on a lot. And my head moves 1,000 miles a minute. And I think I've said this on here before, but I told one therapist once, it's like the radio is on, the TV is on. I'm having a conversation, I'm reading a book, and there's something going on in the other room. And I can tell you what's happening with each of those things, but they're always all going. And so it's really hard for me to turn everything off. So being an over empath, I have had a hard time with wanting to be aware of what's happening in Israel and Palestine, but having a very difficult time processing the imagery and the news and the stuff that I see and hear. So she was asking if there's anything that I have that can turn my head off, if I've ever found anything. It was boxing for me for a long time, was that.
Yeah.
Because it requires you to pay attention to your feet, your hands, your breathing, and then the other person who's throwing their hands at your face. It shut my brain down completely, which was marvelous. But I think I broke my finger doing it, so I don't know if that's the best option. So she's like, what about rock climbing?
Shadow boxing.
I was like, maybe rock climbing might be, because you have to, she's like, it's similar. Like, when you were talking about the boxing, climbing is similar to that, with like, you're using all of your appendages to try to hold yourself, but you're also strategizing how the best thing, and there's it engages the physical, but it engages the mental. And so she's trying really hard to find ways for me to reconnect the head and the heart, but also give my head breaks.
Yeah.
Because it has none.
Yeah.
Which feeds anxiety and everything else. That's an issue.
Totally. One option is I can send you this calendar I just had printed up, and it's 12 months of Mike Erie. Shirtless, and I think you'd particularly enjoy February.
Oh, all right. It's a month
I'm not the empath at all that you are, but my therapist said the same thing. Like there's this massive well of anger that you cover by being nice and being kind and whatever else. And I was like, I don't want to acknowledge that exists. But then we found it, and then it was there. It was very much
hot coal.
It was very much there. And so I'm with you. I loved what your therapist said about stare at a tree and breathe. The video game thing for me has worked for a while as a way to turn my brain off without turning it off.
Yeah.
Do you know
It's
what
hard
I mean?
to find that. Yeah, absolutely. That's what boxing was. You know, our mutual friend, he used to race cars for that reason, because it required everything
Yep.
in you. And so it focused you, and it shut down all that other stuff that's just begging and yelling at you all the time. So
Totally.
it's hard to find that thing for people, because it's like there's three examples that are very different from each other.
Yeah.
So finding what it is for you that enables you, like we've talked a lot about how, I think, how did you say it? Like, we're not built for processing all the information that we're privy to now. Like, we just can't, as human beings, we're not built for it. And it's never existed in human history to this extent, obviously. So finding how to exist in this time and this culture is difficult. And it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of really smart people that understand how humans are wired to help you navigate just the chaos that we're in currently.
Totally.
But it's like the chaos isn't going to go away. So we have to find the healthy ways to navigate it, to do self-care, to do care for the loved ones that are around you. Like, it's just a lot of balancing. But
that's so good, man. So an airport for me is a picture in miniature of what's happening in our world. And there's this, I was just sitting and observing. I don't know why I was super, like, just sort of reflective. And the ambient anxiety and anger that hovers over an airport was just incredible. And it's in me. I mean, it's like, I'm worried about my flight. It's contagious, and it's in the water. And I'm sort of just watching, like, do I feel safe here? Do I feel like I belong here? Am I valued here? And none of those things are, there's not one of those big questions in an airport space, that's answered positively. And, it's this, it's just like, if that seems like idling for our world these days, that level of hostility, anger, right, enforcement, my rights. I need to protect them and enforce them.
In lines at coffee shops and.
Yeah, exactly. So not much grace, not much mercy, not much kindness, not much compassion. And I've just been sitting there. How do you show up in places like that as a Jesus follower who, is trying to run on different fuel?
Right.
And and I don't know, but
well, I keep thinking about that, and like this lens of advocating for humanity, and advocating for people to live into their highest, like just the most human you can be in a positive way. And what does that look like in an airport? How do you help people advocate for their humanity when they're stressed and angry and
tired and hungry?
I think it's a really, I was telling my wife yesterday that I am in a season of trying really hard to basically love my enemy, but that sounds really dramatic, but to like really take a breath and to advocate for the humanity of people that I don't understand or make me angry or I think are aggressive and anything. I'm trying really hard to acknowledge the humanity in everybody. I'm like, and it's really, for me, it's very, very difficult. Not that I dehumanize them, but I do to a certain extent with people that are advocating for hate or doing these things that I just can't understand, and they're hurting people. I'm trying to see them as human beings first, and it has been a difficult task. I can't. You said something earlier about ushering people out of church really quickly so we can get to the next service. I can't get that out of my head. There's a really that just says a lot, and I'm having all night. You said that, and I just had like 50 memories pop in my head of like talking to people after church services or something, and having these church staff people push us out and being like, "Isn't this why we're here?" Like,
Yeah. No, I was one of those push-outers.
You're just wrestling with that, but I feel like that's indicative of something much more within the church structure.
Yeah. Well, you can't answer any of those questions positively in a group of 800, 1,000, 6,000, whatever it is.
Well, especially with the
Right?
guys and gals you just met with, like those are people who don't some of those people are people that don't feel comfortable in a large congregation like that. So
That's right.
are they sinful because they're introverts?
Yeah.
You know, that's a
Yeah.
terribly dumb question to ask. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
what the article is saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know of the author who wrote it, and there's been lots of good things this person has said. It was just that you pull that quote out about it's our wayward hearts, it's not the church leadership scandals, and it seems like spiritual bypassing, I think is what it's called, where it's just easier to say it's our issue and you're just using it as an excuse. And it's like, I don't know, man. There's so much awfulness, so much. I on Twitter, X, I bookmark every story I come across of a youth pastor or a clergy member or a minister who has been arrested and charged with sexual misconduct.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know how we're up to over 50, I think, or something.
Do you have
I mean,
a separate folder for all the drag queens that do it?
I know there's one atheist guy that I follow who just texts, not a drag queen.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just going, I don't know, man. I don't know. If we're going to continue, I mean, that does nothing to win back any of the people who left. And I don't know. It just seems like
there's
foolish.
Poison in the well, and the article is saying just keep drinking the water. God will take the poison out. Like, don't worry about it. Just you have to keep drinking the water.
Yeah.
And it's like, nope, no, you don't.
Well, and you would think at some point following Jesus should make a difference, you know? So I don't know.
And it does in some places.
Yeah. And it's very disruptive elsewhere. All right. We're at 50 minutes.
Well, there's a lot going on in the world, Mike.
Oh, Timothy. Do you want to try Babylon? Do you want to try Babylon part 2?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. All right. We'll see how far we get.
I think we just talked about Babylon. Hey-o.
Wow. So we introduced last episode the archetype. There was a literal city of Babylon that became an archetype, a picture of organized human rebellion against God. And, shockingly, that imagery gets brought into Egypt. That imagery gets brought into Israel. And in both situations, they experience a day of the Lord, again, an archetype. Now we're going to read, not surprisingly, that Rome is the Babylon. And we're going to have 3 chapters full of why Babylon is awful, how Babylon is defeated, and how great it is that Babylon is defeated. And again, it's tempting to read this as something that's going to happen in the future. And in one sense, it does, because God opposes all human kingdoms and their oppression of others. But in another sense, the Babylon that is very specifically being referred to here is Rome. And so to just apply it, automatically and uncritically into kind of our situations today, it's just not a wise move. This is Rome. And in fact, Rome was called Babylon by some of the early Christians. Like in 1 Peter, Peter's writing to exiles, and he says, with the help of Silas, whom I regard as a faithful brother, I have written to you briefly, encouraging you and testifying that this is the true grace of God. Stand fast in it. She who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends her greetings. So does my son Mark. Babylon here just meaning the place name of Rome. This was being written from Rome. And so when we get to Revelation 17, and we're going to meet a woman who rides a great red dragon called a beast. All of these images now are going to start coagulating around the imperial city of Rome. So one of the seven angels, this is chapter 17, verse 1. One of the seven angels who had 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters." Now, as we all know, prostitution or adultery or sexual infidelity was a picture of spiritual infidelity, unholy spiritual alliance or collaboration. And so we're going to read a lot about a prostitute committing adultery and fornication. And we're not talking about literal prostitutes committing literal adultery or fornication. We're talking about the idolatry of Rome.
Yeah.
And remember, Rome was personified in a goddess named Roma.
Right.
Roma was the eternal goddess. That's why Rome is the eternal city. And Roma was so important. She's on the backside of lots of coins from that time. She typically sits on 7 hills and has 7 stars in her hand. She is usually dressed very modestly in a very high-class toga. But here, she's going to be pictured as a prostitute dressed for business. And again, there's a very polemical function here in the descriptors that are being used. So, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute. So now, we've been building up. We've had Day of the Lord scenarios and Day of the Lord scenarios. Now we're going to get the final Day of the Lord scenario, which is going to be now the Day of the Lord against Babylon. All right? Then we're going to have a picture of the ultimate Day of the Lord where everybody is judged. But this in Revelation is the last cycle of judgment over the Babylon of their day. So with her, the kings of the earth, the nations of the earth have committed adultery. So they've benefited spiritually by her idolatry. With her, the kings of the earth have committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. Now, we're now going to read about what that means, and it's going to be in almost purely economic terms, right? So in Rome, there was an unholy alliance between the priesthood of Rome, the military of Rome, and the business of Rome. And that alliance produced a way of consuming the ancient resources of the world that left one nation richer than it knew what to do with, and all the other nations impoverished. And that's going to be part of the critique. All right? So we're not talking about, Rome's sins in the abstract. We're talking about Rome's sins economically. So the angel carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. All right, we've met the wilderness. There was a woman who was in the wilderness chased by a dragon in chapter 12. Now we're meeting another woman in the wilderness. And there's going to be this ongoing theme between the bride of Christ and this great prostitute of Rome, and Babylon, the city of the prostitute, and the New Jerusalem, which is the city of the bride. And so you have this pure, kind of clean and unclean, impure sort of back and forth between the two cities for the rest of the book.
Yeah.
Right? So you're going to realize New Jerusalem is here and now, and New Jerusalem is coming. And Babylon is here and now, and Babylon is coming and will be judged. So you get this, you've got a whole bunch of now and not yet stuff happening.
Yeah.
There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast. Now, beasts, as we know from last week, or a couple episodes ago, beasts are nations. And this beast had 7 heads and 10 horns. And we're going to read what those are in just a second. The text will interpret that for us. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, very garnishly, and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. So she's dressed ostentatiously with more than she needs. She held a golden cup in her hand. So again, all these symbols of great, great wealth, excess, and self-indulgence. And the cup was filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. In other words, it was filled with the luxuries of her way of life. Roma, the goddess, stood for literally law, order, peace, stability. Here, the goddess is going to stand for the parasite, the abomination, the anti-benefactor of the world. All the things that Rome claimed for itself turn out to not be true, and the opposite's true. Rome isn't the great gift to the world, it's the great taker in the world. Her name was written on her forehead, and it was a mystery. And now, here's what's interesting. So we're told this is a symbolic name. Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and abominations of the earth. That's not a mystery. And it's fascinating. Like this Roma, this modest goddess has now been exposed as this craven, greedy parasite. I mean, it's just like in the ancient world, you could not have stronger biblical prophetic language for what's happening here. Yeah. I saw that woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. So again, the persecution that is here and is coming, right, is measured in the blood of the martyrs. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. Don't know why. Then the angel said to me, "Why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns." This calls for a mind of wisdom. Now, we've read this when we came across 666. It's the author telling the reader, you know this,
right,
but it requires some thinking. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. Now this, you could not, if I were to say, hey, you know that city that has the Statue of Liberty? You'd know exactly where that was, or the Golden Gate Bridge. Or do you know that city that has the Sears Tower, or that city that has the great Ohio State Buckeye football team? National landmarks, right? You would know the city. So there's only one city on 7 hills, and that's Rome. And it was famous. I mean, it was in their coinage and in their hymns. Rome sits on 7 hills. So, and it's called Babylon. So you've got this ancient archetype brought forward and the way it's brought forward is by using the goddess Roma, like that image, and portraying her as this great drunken prostitute who sells her soul to the nations, right? And the nations benefit from her. So the 7 heads are the 7 hills on which she sits. So there's no doubt whatsoever, we're talking about Rome right here. They are also 7 kings. So the heads represent the place she resides and the fullness of her rule. And again, 7 in Revelation is a symbolic number that means fullness. So even though 7 churches are mentioned, that we know there are more churches in the area, 7 are representative as the full church. 7 kings, that's just representative of all the emperors of Rome. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other is not yet come, but when he does come, he must remain for only a little while. The beast who once was and now is not is the 8th king. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction. Utterly no clue what that is in reference to. Then we read about client kings. These are other nations that bow to Rome. So the 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who've not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour, a short time, will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. So this is the military and economic might of the other nations of the world in collusion with Rome. They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them because he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings, and with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. So no doubt who we're talking about here. The woman stands for the great city who rests on 7 hills, obviously Rome. We're pulling forward Babylon language to describe the economic injustice that was also true of Egypt and was also true of Israel.
Yeah.
Now, in Revelation 18, we begin to celebrate her downfall. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice, he shouted, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She's become a dwelling for demons and a haunt for every impure spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable animal." Now, when you go into the prophets, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and I know there's one more that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. There are great passages in the prophets that describe the fall of cities. Ancient Babylon, Tyre, and Edom. All right, this is in Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. There we go. John is going to use almost all of the imagery from those texts to describe the fall of Rome. So again, nothing new is happening. But what's happened to other empires is now going to happen to Rome. Make sense?
Yeah.
So a haunt for every impure spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable animal. That's Old Testament image. For all of the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adultery. So because she is idolatrous and blasphemous, there are other nations that benefit from her being that way. And that's what it means to drink the wine of her adulteries, that you are benefiting from her excess and her exploitation. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries.
It's such a good. It's a great metaphor, because the idea that leads to the intoxication